Hello and happy ErgoSummit. I'm Alex Chepurnoy, also known as Kushti, co-developer of Ergo. And in this talk I'm going to present some thoughts of mine on Ergo and the future of finance. This topic is huge, so I'm going to talk about just some aspects here on how Ergo and other cryptocurrencies can be useful in reworking global financial systems. Nevertheless, I think I hope that this talk would be systematic and topical. Alright, if we are going to talk about future, let's start with the current state. So what we do have now in global financial systems, that is increasing fragmentation, definitely, with increasing usage of national currencies in global trade via two-way swaps and so on. As a result, we see increasing fragility as well. In many places, the global financial systems seem to be disbalanced with shortage of foreign currencies, which was clearly visible in many African and Asian countries back in 2022 with DXY index being at record levels. Sometimes we also see high inflation in many countries and so on. Definitely there is urgent need for change, especially in some areas. For example, in Central African franc zone and so on. And also, for this change, there is a need for more collateral to allow for more money issuance in many places. Alright, then what we do have in cryptocurrencies in general right now. So the space is quite huge already. According to various estimations, there are from 300 to 400 million users. But still, the space is mostly about speculations, sometimes very wild speculations. Despite the fact that we already have DeFi tooling for 5 years, it is still disconnected from the real world. And there is a lot of money printing in DeFi, so a lot of tokens issued just to grease liquidity providers, for example, so-called liquidity mining, and so on. Cryptocurrencies are not producing good collateral for the real world to use cryptocurrency assets as base money for as a kind of digital gold for creating high-level money aggregates on top of. And still emission in cryptocurrencies and blockchain tokens is disconnected from economic activity, both real world and on-chain. And proposals to kind of fix that are usually controversial and bringing some trust there. All right. So what we have in the Ergo ecosystem at the same time right now? So well, we have stable core development with a lot of things already done in 2022, 2023, and a lot of ongoing work. We have a growing ecosystem with unique peer-to-peer financial tools such as SigmaFi, which is well, a way to issue bonds in peer-to-peer way, and Sigma, which is about, well, issuing options in also peer-to-peer fashion. Well, there is quite unique understanding of trust issues in the ecosystem via Know Your Assumptions language framework, and well, also a quite unique understanding of emission tooling. I'm going to provide a lot of details further. So with the current state in mind, what could be goals? So for the whole cryptocurrency space, well, definitely the top goal is about bringing real world value. So well, DeFi should do that. Well, definitely better understanding of trust issues in all the protocols needed from layer 2 to from layer 1, sorry, layer 0 actually, even to layer 1 to layer 2 to well, roll-ups, sidechains, sharding, and so on, to applications. And then with that understanding, well, what's needed for the real world adoption is creating good quality collateral for money issuance, so to produce digital gold for real. And well, for the Ergo ecosystem, what should be in mind, in my personal opinion, that is, well, working on non-breaking layer 2 scaling, which is work in progress for a few years at the moment, with quite significant progress already done, but also a lot of ongoing work there. Well, still a lot of work and well, launching real products needed in regards with blockchain offloading with layer 2 solutions, sidechains, and so on. Well, still there is a need for developing a framework for defining and producing good collateral. Well, here the Ergo ecosystem is quite ahead of the space, as I will show further, but some work is needed still. Then promoting Know Your Assumptions language to the masses is definitely needed, and with that the mass adoption will come, but yeah, a lot of hard work is needed as well. And well, let's now jump on good collateral and what could be counted as good collateral tokens. So let's talk about emission contracts. So as many of you know, hopefully. Well, for the native currency of the Ergo blockchain, so the Ergo cryptocurrency, we have emission with decrement to 0 after many years. So we have a fixed total supply, and well, emission is available to miners only. And unlike well, all the cryptocurrencies in the space I'm aware of, emission is done via contract. Right, and well, there are a lot of advantages here. So for example, this contract was reviewed and tested separately from the reference client code in different environments, different test beds, and so on. So we can then be pretty sure about how this contract does work. But also, well, with this emission contract, it's quite obvious that we can run similar or heavily modified versions of it to reward miners, or maybe not just miners, even maybe well, different agents. All right, then well, similar to native cryptocurrency emission contract, actually a few contracts already were launched and used well, back in 2021 by Get Block Mining Pool and its partners to basically airdrop some portion of tokens, some tokens to Get Block miners. Right, and there is even a name for such contracts already in the ecosystem. That is FIMO, Fair Initial Mining or Miners Offering. And well, in case of FIMO, well, emission is done as for a native token. So every block, well, block miner, or maybe just a specific mining pool only, in case if it is mining a block, can charge the emission contract with some well, deterministic amount defined by emission schedule. So very similar thing, but miners can get more tokens, which is good for well, miners, for stability of mining process, but also it's quite a good way of distributing tokens, as well, it's impossible to cheat here. So in order to get tokens, you need to spend electricity and to do real work, providing proof of work to get paid. So you cannot do fake Facebook accounts, for example, or something like that. All right, but well, from that we can go even further. So at some point there was thread started on the Ergo forum about so-called market-driven emission contracts, which is about adding price as an input to an emission contract from decentralized exchange, for example. And then, emission can be changed deterministically, by using not just predefined emission schedule, but also price input. For example, if the price is not growing or declining, the emission can be reduced. Like in Alefium's proof of less work, you can reduce emission if hash rate is going up drastically, and so on. Most of emission contracts just things per se, so they disconnected from on-chain and off-chain economic activity. We can also have some on-chain economic utility with emission contracts. For example, in case of Gold Oracle reward token, we have limited predefined emission to Oracle pool operators, and also part of emission going to Dev Treasury, and Dev Treasury is also an emission contract with limited 1 GOT per block release. Then with fixed emission, so it's better for investors to make informed decisions. We can talking about emission mechanisms, go further and use DeFi tools for emission. So one clear example here is auction coin, which is pure disconnected from economic activity blockchain, Ergo blockchain token with quite interesting, in my opinion, emission rules. So every epoch in current instantiation, 10 auctions been created with 1,000 auction coins to be sold. Per batch of 10 auctions. And all the ERCs raised via auctions are injected into auction coin to ERC liquidity pool. And in case of unsold auction coins, they are going back to the emission contract. And then there is a site, auctioncoin.app, where you can see emission details and auctions details. And as you can see from these websites, emission is going slowly, as after selling 1,000 auction coins, the contract is buying back auction coins. Right, so with decreasing price auctions chosen for the initial instantiation, maybe it's not so, let's say, pumpy, but in case of increasing price auctions, for example, due to irrational results often delivered by this kind of auctions, so it could be the case easily that the contract will buy often more auction coins from the liquidity pool than sold on the auctions. This contract is disconnected again from economic activity, but we can imagine some options to tie it with some activity. So, for example, to use auction coin for fundraising, where, for example, only part of the ERGs raised via auctions are injected into the liquidity pool, and others are going to a team doing fundraising, for example. So on the auction coin website you can find a white paper with that idea. So it's not just a game then, but yeah, it's something different, so it can be thought as quite useful emission contract. And then, we can do even more interesting games here in the emission part, in emission contract. So, for example, there is a proposal for option coin, which is similar to auction coin. But here we are using options instead of auctions. So every epoch emission contract is issuing call options for option coins with execution price for options taken from liquidity pool. And then ERGs raised from both selling and executing options are injected back into option coin to ERG liquidity pool. And again, unsold option coins are going back to the emission contract. And it's quite interesting that this contract is basically, by selling options, selling volatility, option coin volatility. Right, but also it is trying to increase this volatility by using injections. So it's not launched yet, but mechanics could be quite interesting. And again, it can be useful not as a financial game kind of, but also for fundraising and other economic activities. So what we can find in common here in emission contracts, that is algorithmic, so trustless issuance. And issued tokens are not distributed for free, they are sold for proof of work solutions. Right, and to get these solutions, you need to spend another kind of currency, let's say, which is electricity. Or issued tokens also can be sold directly, explicitly for other tokens, like in auction coin and option coin. And thus, issuance and distribution rules are perfectly known. If they're set in stone in a contract, they're not subject to change. There could be for sure additional filters applied outside the contract, like EP 27 done for the native ERG cryptocurrency. And so as the rules are perfectly known, markets can be built and freely evolved around this publicly known information. Right, and then tokens issued via algorithmic issuance via emission contracts. Well, they are quite friendly to free markets. Probably the most friendly options for truly free markets. Alright, but then how can we use such tokens if we are going back from algorithms and financial games even to the real world? They can be used as collateral, right? So you can issue bonds and offer bonds in peer-to-peer fashion via SigmaFi, or you can borrow from dark pools. You can issue stable coins, getting stable priced derivative tokens, which is only available for Ergo native cryptocurrency at the moment, but we can imagine that with time there could be stable coins backed by other tokens. You can issue peer-to-peer cash for directly, for example, via Chain Cash, which is not launched yet, but there is ongoing work on getting Chain Cash server launched, maybe in a few months. All right, and then with this system of trustless emission contracts with a variety of emission contracts with trustless issuance. It is possible to get good quality trustless collateral, also with some elasticity of supply. But this elasticity is coming via launching new tokens, which has its own drawbacks. But also, it works, and maybe it's the less evil than printing tokens with not so trustless way of issuance. And emission of good quality collateral tokens could be tied with on-chain economic activity even. And then on top of this kind of base money, on top of emission contracts issuing let's say digital gold kind of tokens with trustless issuance, we can have also elasticity of high level monetary aggregates issuance. So there are two ways here. So first one is extensive one. So by just issuing more and more collateral tokens with trustless issuance, we can have more and more derivatives via let's say traditional over-collateralized DeFi we have today, or with Chain Cash market agents can have elasticity of monetary issuance. As well in Chain Cash market agents using Chain Cash peer-to-peer cash are defining money supply money supply now based on individual decisions on collateralization and trust. And so, this is decided by agents and free markets made of agents. Then we have a good chance to produce financial tools to solve real-world problems, and then on the road to adoption, we need for more scaling solutions to prepare for the real-world adoption. And also, with even existing Ergo tooling, we already can think about solving real-world use cases. So the ecosystem needs to find and solve real-world problems. For example, by helping with borrowing where it is needed and borrowing conditions are terrible, and also to bring power to commodity producers. So with chain cash, for example, in addition to trustlessly emitted tokens, there could be real-world digitalized commodity tokens used in the same system, which is bringing power to commodity producers from tea and coffee to gold producers in Africa and so on. That's it, and thank you for your attention.